Hi there, it's Carl Irwin, the Common Magician, and I've got a story for you. It goes like this. Two little birdies sitting on a hill, one named Jack, one named Jill. Fly away Jack, fly away Jill, come back Jack, come back Jill. And this is what I was reminded of from an email that I got just today, actually earlier today, that I read through or responded to from someone who frequents the channel. And they had a question about motivating magic for the common magician. And it was pertaining to another lecture, another talk given by a professional magician who was referring to the fact that you have to gain audience investment in what you're doing. You have to have a buy-in from the audience in order to be effective and have good magic. And the question that came from that was, what do I think about storytelling as it pertains to delivering a magic effect? Is that necessary, rather than merely the catchline that I give, which is typically the first time you haven't heard it in a long time, probably here, is I have something interesting to show you. Well, I actually have a video where I talk about issues related to this that I'll put in the comments or in the description. You can check that out. It's from a year ago, where I talk about storytelling specifically, and I'll reiterate some of those ideas, but I don't want to rehash that same video. We'll talk about some other elements. Kids trick, right? This is a kid's trick, but I have to admit that thimble magic, which is really what this is, it's just a simple thimble trick, which is antiquated now contextually. Thimbles are not terribly common items in households anymore. But thimble magic is arguably the precursor to ring magic, which is very relevant. But I have a question for you. Obviously, this was done with a little story, a little nursery rhyme kind of application. And you could do the trick, essentially, without that. But I think anyone would agree that the experience of the effect is better with a little story, given the nature of that presentation. When you look at ring magic, however, do you often hear stories that go along with ring magic? No, actually, I would associate ring magic also with cardistry, because cardistry is really a juggling. What do you see with ring magic and cardistry, particularly on social media? Now, people do ring magic in live situations, and usually what they describe in live situations is sensation. They describe what is happening with the ring in terms of the sensation or the suggestion of feeling, right? You can feel the ring locking one, finger to the next or whatever. Or if they're doing it on another spectator using gimmickry, they'll talk about sensation and feeling, and that's the buy-in, that's the description. They are explaining what's going on in a sensational way, in a feeling way, at an emotional level. That is essentially the story. You don't typically hear storytelling, though, with a lot of ring magic, although you could apply stories to anything, as I described in that other video, and the benefit to telling stories. However, when you see ring magic and cardistry, in particular on social media, how is it portrayed? It's never alone. It is never just ring magic. It's not just the effect. What do you have with it? Music. You almost always have music. Music, like storytelling, is a magic holding art form in and of itself, in that the magic is part of the aesthetics of the art form, right? You can tell stories. There are professional storytellers. That's what they do for a living. They tell stories, other people's stories, not even their own stories, but they tell stories, and their mastery in storytelling is the aesthetic experience. That's them telling the story the way that they do. It's not in the story itself necessarily, although good stories are better for storytelling, obviously. Good jokes are good for good comedy. Bad jokes are not good for good comedy unless the point of the comedy is the badness of the joke. I've got my dad in keeping with children's magic and common magic theme. I've got my dad joke shirt on. I keep all my dad jokes in a database, right? Unless the badness of the joke is the comedy, you have to have a good joke to have good comedy. Got to have good stories to have good storytelling. But the storytelling is the art form in and of itself, and there's an aesthetic element to that in the way the story is told that makes it magical. Music has that same thing. It has that same quality. Visual art has the same quality as well. So when you see ring magic in social media or cardistry, there's almost always music involved. And the music is portraying the hits in timing, as in film score, which is something I know something about. In music, that I'm a composer myself. I have mastery at that. There are two things that I have mastery over. Magic isn't one of them. Okay, I'm an amateur. I am a hobbyist magician. I don't do this for a living as a professional. I think that one would say that I have mastered some of the things that I do for people, and I wouldn't do anything for people unless I have mastery over it. But I wouldn't call that something that I have mastery over. I have mastery over teaching. I am a master teacher. It's my profession. I've invested an enormous amount of time in doing it. It's what I do for a living. I would go to the bank on my skills as a teacher because I have experience and I have schooling in that, and I've developed techniques in that, and I continue to learn in it. The other thing that I have mastery in is music, particularly music composition. I have done the same kinds of investment in that, and I know something about it. So music has this kind of quality and aesthetics, and people doing video for magic, they know this, just like a filmmaker. They'll take music and they'll use the hit points of the music and the aesthetic climax of the music, and they will sync that up with their magic. Very effective. It's the same thing as telling a story. It's the same way to get investment and buy-in. But there's something else that you see in cardistry and ring magic in particular. Maybe rubber band magic to a certain degree if you see some videos on that, social media shared video. And that is videography, specifically high-speed videography. So high-speed camera recording, where you have a high frame rate, it allows you to do slow motion. That technique in videography by itself is a magnificent device for storytelling. So much of action movies, paradoxically, is made up of high-speed videography in slow motion. When you have an enormous amount of action going on, and then making a majority of that action be portrayed in slow motion, there's something paradoxical about that heightens the action. So when you see cardistry, you see music, and you see videography techniques being applied. That is the storytelling that creates the investment. So I think what you're talking about here is not storytelling in particular. I think you're talking about presentation, and you're talking about bringing in other presentational elements to incorporate into the effect itself, so that the effect doesn't sit alone, but rather the effect is buttressed by other presentational techniques. I absolutely believe in that. When you look at someone like Daertes and his card magic, which is very matter of fact, he doesn't tell stories with his card magic. He doesn't bring in other kinds of associations, but the way he presents is storytelling in and of itself. Leonard Green, right, who is a precursor to Daertes and Tamarith, right? When you look at these people, you see storytelling in action, maybe without external stories. What they're doing is that on a human level, they are relating to the audience with personality and with themes. There's themes to what they're doing. It could be the theme of chaos. It could be the theme of, the theme of being lackadaisical, of being hands-off, of being random. Those kinds of themes, and a could care less attitude about that sort of handling. That is storytelling. That is thematic. And I think that one has to make such things believable. You have to work at a craft of being believable in your storytelling. If I did the same trick, which you obviously know, it's a, old method. If this fooled you, I'd be shocked. Although there is something about thimble magic, ring magic, and even its simplest form that can be very off-putting in the moment. And there's something about time too, as an aside, where when you're performing live for people, it's this cups and balls 101. When you do something for people in a live situation, they only get to see it then. And once the effect has already occurred, they don't have the benefit of going back and seeing it again. It's not been necessarily recorded. It's being witnessed live. So if you watch something like thimble magic or ring magic with very simple rudimentary kinds of applications, if you see it the very first time in a live setting and you don't know what's going on and you're not in the know, you'll get caught out. But anyway, back to this. If I do the same thing again, and I, in a very immature way, say, let me tell you a story. It goes like this. 2 little birds sitting on a hill, one named Jack, one named Jill. Fly away, Jack, fly away, Jill. Come back, Jack, come back, Jill. It lacks speed, it lacks investment, it lacks a care and consideration on my part as the storyteller. Where if I say 2 little birds sitting on a hill, one named Jack, one named Jill. Fly away, Jack, fly away, Jill. Come back, Jack, come back, Jill. There's a speed and agility to it, and there's also a cadence to what I'm doing that has maturity, right? Just that little bit of investment in a couple of different storytelling techniques, inflection and speed, can improve upon the effect. Right? This is why you have to recite your stuff. If you're going to invest in any kind of scripting, and I think all presentations require scripting at a level, doesn't necessarily have to be a scripting of a story. You need to practice it word for word so that you know the order intuitively of what you are saying and what you are doing. Not just what you're doing, but what you're saying in association with what you're doing. You don't want to go out there in that, you see, it's kid magic. It's kid magic par for the course. If you've ever had an opportunity to look up old videos of Ricky Jay when he was a kid, in one of his documentaries, I can't remember which one it was that he did years and years and years and years ago. It's probably 20 years old, the documentary, where it's kind of a little autobiographical talk of him, done by him, produced by his people. And he shows some video of him performing as a child for big magician audiences, right? And it's bad. It's really bad. It's just prop parlor magic done by a kid. Not to say that kids can't do magic well, but it has the maturity of a child. You can have mature presentations and be a youngster, but what it requires is an investment in care in the way that you're presenting your magic. You can't just have your script or your story. That's not good enough. Just applying a story to an effect, it will not improve it on its own. You have to tell it well. And because stories as a motivation for tricks require that you tell them well, you essentially don't necessarily need stories. You just need to tell the trick well. Either way, you've got to do it well. You have to do it well. You have to present well. I think that is really what we're getting at here. So connection with audiences as a common magician, I think it requires that you act in a professional way. I've seen some professionals, I'll be honest with you. I've seen some Magic Castle acts that have been recorded that you can see. They're not very good acts. Nonetheless, these people obviously went through their time in their audition and they're professionals and they were inducted in and they're members and they performed there and they do other performances. But their storytelling is pretty poor. It's just not engaging. It's not interesting. It's kind of the typical quintessential cliche of the magician. Yeah. You can see this in cabinet magic, what I call cabinet magic, stage illusions. Portrayals of stage illusions that, because none of us were around to see it over 100 years ago, where you had magicians, the great magicians of their time, getting out on stage doing a cabinet illusion of some sort. It involves an apparatus, cabinetry for the stage, be it, an escape device or some other kind of appearance, a vanishing device or transformation device, cabinet illusion. They get out there, and the way the presentations used to go is, I have this device from the Far East made of the woods of the, alpine blah, blah, blah. And that is the story they tell. But otherwise, all they're doing is they're describing the trick. And at that time, there was a captivating element to that. You cannot get away with that now. You can't really get away with that, not even in a parlor setting. You just can't do that. You're going to have some other kind of buy-in for the audience because sensibilities have changed. So nonetheless, I think you can still do something very close to that. One description I think that comes close to that would be Copperfield back in the late 90s, early 2000s. He did one of his last videoed stage shows that he did had to do with a spirit cabinet effect. And he had a very similar kind of story. The story was that this spirit cabinet is actually the what do you call it? The cupola, is that what you call it? I don't know. The kind of the top room in a tower on a house, right? And his story was that we got all of the parts of this burnt down in the house and we put it together here and this is it and this story, and it's all, of course, phony and made up. That was his story, but it comes very close to this cabinet is made of the mahogany from the blah, blah, it's very similar. And I think that's as close as you can get. But you notice in Copperfield, the way he does it, there's music, right? There's camera angle videography, there's lighting. There's all of this modern sensibility art form in the storytelling that is helping to engage the audience and get the buy-in. Otherwise, everybody that's there knows that it's a cabinet trick. They come knowing that, right? It just requires that kind of, perhaps it requires that kind of story, but I think more importantly, it requires good storytelling. And Copperfield is a master storyteller. That's really what he does. He's just doing cabinet illusions, stage illusions, largely that we understand, I think. And the audience, to a degree, I think, understands a lot of what's going on. But it passes by so well because he invests in presentation. So that's what's required. Maybe that's a very long-winded way of saying yes and no to the question. I think stories are incredibly important. I think they are useful. I don't think they're essential, though. I don't. I really don't. I think that the essential thing is a quality presentation. Is being a good storyteller, regardless of the story you're telling, whether it's a story, a Sam the Bellhop, a card story trick, a story deck trick. There's a lot of them, right? The Sam of the Bellhop is the one everybody knows. That is really a gambling presentation because it is really operating on the premise of card control. That's what everybody knows. The performer is controlling the cards. What it's doing, though, is it is co-opting the environment of card control from gamblers, from a gambling demonstration, and it's replacing it with a story in and of itself, which the story itself might have some gambling elements to it, but it doesn't have to. It's just stealing that presentational theme and it's replacing it with a story that's separate from it. Regardless, both of those presentations require the same good storytelling. If you do both with bad storytelling skills, the effect will fall apart. the engagement will fall apart. It will be uninteresting. Now, another thing, last thing I'll say that is on the con side for storytelling is, I know Gregory Wilson talks about this a little bit, in that when dealing with adults in certain environments, right, doing magical passes and telling stories that go along with tricks can be extremely off-putting to those audiences, and you have to know your audience, right? The audience, as he puts it, the spectator will very visibly demonstrate, that's nice, I'm going to go talk to the adults now, right? Enough of the kids stuff. So you have to be mindful of who you're talking to, right? Who are you presenting for? Not only does the effect match the audience, but does the presentation style match the audience? You have to be wise in doing that. So anyway, just a little bit more discussion on presentation and storytelling and, what I feel about it. To reiterate a major point from that other video, how do you get good at presentation and storytelling? The number one thing that I think you can do is record yourself telling a true story. One, take something that has happened to you in life. It could be a very grand thing. It could be a very unbelievable thing. It could be a very simple thing, like just telling the story of your day yesterday, what you ate for breakfast, all the way up to the show that you watched on TV before you went to bed. Okay, just tell your day, but do it on video in the most engaging way that you can. Tell the true story. Okay, do that and then analyze what is it like when you're telling a story to someone else. As if you're telling somebody else, a person sitting there, you're never going to believe what happened to me. This is what happened, blah, 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 and then blah, 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 and you'll, again, this is the best part, blah, blah, blah. Do that and then analyze what it's like to do that and then import all of those inflections into your presentational style. Do your magic like you tell true stories. The second one is to take a fictitious story and tell it like it is real. Take a fictitious story. It's very easy to do with children's books, is what I talk about on the last video. Take a children's book. If you have kids and you've got children's books lying around, take one out and read through it. They're short and they're easy. Read through it like it's a true, actual story, like you're telling somebody what you read about in the news. Okay, do that, record it, and pay attention to the inflections of what true storytelling looks like, and make sure that you're presenting your magic in a truthful manner, that it has an investment from you that says that you care about what you're saying so that the audience can care about what you're saying and doing. I think those are good exercises to get good at that. Young people, right? It's going to be very hard for you because you will find at your age level that true storytelling is a very embarrassing thing. Acting, right? Acting in the school play. It's hard to be a good actor as a kid because it's so embarrassing to you to do everything the right way, right? You have to get rid of that and you have to just go for it. And the way that you do that is you act in the play or in your storytelling as you do in real life. When you're with your friends and you're joshing around and you're goofing around and you're clowning around and you're telling jokes and you're, ragging on each other and you're telling stories, make sure that you're doing your acting that way and you'll be an excellent actor. You'll be Academy Award level actor if you import truthfulness and reality in the way you live your life to the way you tell your stories, right? And so it goes with your presentation. So that's my advice, and those are my feelings on it. Is it necessary? Not at all. What is necessary is quality, masterful presentation. Tell your stories. If you're telling a story, tell it real. If you're not telling a story and you're just giving narration to what you're doing, point for point, do it real. Make sure that you're invested in it. Good luck with that. Happy magicking.